Afternoon here. I have been told I have a little bit of a delay today on the talking, so I apologize. I am here at Call to Peace Ministries office, and we're having a little bit of a weather problem, so it's delaying our internet. So I'm excited today to introduce our church partner liaisons. Jim Upchurch is on his way here, so he will be joining us. And then today I'll go ahead and let the two that are here to go ahead and introduce themselves and tell about their role with Call to Peace Ministries.
Yeah, so my name's Dan Beck. I've been married to my wife Shannon for closing in on 31 years. We have 5 daughters, 4 of whom are married. We have one still living at home. I spent 27 years as an associate pastor in a variety of different roles, working with youth, families, that kind of thing. Witnessed the upheaval in that time that kind of domestic violence creates in families. And we ended up having Jim Upchurch work with us in a situation that we were facing, and that led me into joining the advocacy training program through Call to Peace, and then eventually that led into me being invited to join the staff as a liaison. So.
We are glad to have you.
Yeah. And I'm Andre Turrentine. I'm pastor at the Shepherds in the Field Church in Raleigh, North Carolina. I actually met Joy Forrest downtown Wake Forest as I was, and there was a sign that she had out about Call Peace Ministries that caught my attention. As a MDiv graduate, part of my training, CPE training, was during an urban ministries portion, and I did work with Interact, which is a domestic violence shelter in Raleigh, North Carolina. And as a result of that, along with the history I had, there was domestic violence in my family for a couple of generations. There was things that caught my attention, and I really saw a need and was drawn to that work. So when I met Joy, I immediately asked her about what she was doing. Ended up being a board member of Call to Peace for almost 6 years before moving into this position of pastoral or church liaison. And it's been a pleasure to come alongside pastors to help them understand how this is so different than from couples ministry or marriage counseling.
Yes, absolutely. And we're grateful for the both of you. And Jim Upchurch will be here hopefully shortly, and he will introduce himself. But he is our third church partner liaison, and he has been with us, I think, around at least 2 years. I think. Do y'all know exactly how long he's been?
As the
Somewhere
church
around there.
liaison, 2 years. He also started on
Okay.
the board of Call to Peace Ministries.
Yes, I remember meeting him 4 years ago. So I
Yeah.
know he's been there for a while as meeting some of y'all too. So we are excited to have our interview today and talk a little bit about domestic abuse in the church and maybe just explore some things. One, this is a really good message for pastors listen to. So if you're listening, go ahead and share this to your wall, share this to your pastor, church leaders, or it's also good for women to listen to as well, as we're kind of going to speak some truths to women who find themselves in domestically abusive marriages, giving them some hope and healing as well. And so I would like to start with my first question is, if you could say one thing to pastors about domestic abuse, one thing, what would you say?
I think I'd like to say, I know that there are a lot of demands on your time, a lot of needs in your congregation, and that you're pulled lots of different directions. But in cases of domestic violence, getting it wrong in terms of your response and how you approach it, how you handle it, can have really devastating consequences, and not just for the victim, but even in terms of holding the abuser accountable. And I think it even can impact the gospel and the people's receptivity to the gospel and your ability to communicate that. And so I would just ask pastors to be willing to challenge your assumptions and beliefs about domestic violence, particularly if you don't have any formal training or experience in handling it.
Hmm. I agree with
Excellent.
that, Dan. I would add that you will have to, as a pastor, you will not be able to play a neutral role in,
Mm,
if you're going to engage, you will not be able to remain neutral. This is not something where you look at it and uh, assume that there is a mutual offense or offense being taken.
yeah,
And you will have to make a decision on who you're going to side with. And unfortunately, uh, the uh, uh, the oppressors in this, the abusers, would like for you to not do anything, just
mm,
you, just to give them an ear, to not engage would be just fine. But the one that's being abused is going to look for everything out of you. Uh, they're going to look for you to believe them, to interact, to pray, to intercede, to stand in a gap and do something. But at the same time, you have to be careful and knowledgeable about what you do, because if you to do it wrong could cause a great deal of damage, as Dan said.
absolutely. Why do you think it's so easy for pastors to misunderstand the dynamics of domestic abuse?
I can speak for myself. I am a happy-go-lucky guy. I want to believe that the best is coming out and for everyone. I want to believe that people are telling me the truth and being transparent when they describe
Hmm.
issues that they feel like they're dealing with. And that's not the case. Um, and so often we think that the issues that couples deal with, everybody has a part to play in it. And so we miss the indications that look like her response was out of out of this issue, or his response was reasonable in this understanding. But when you come to see and look and ask questions and see how much is being left out, um, that's when it starts to hit you, and then you start to realize how messy this is going to be. And I think a lot of times pastors, um, Christians even, they don't want to get into people's business. But what we have to do is ask the hard questions to find out what is truly going on. And I think we hesitate to do that sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Andre. I think that there is a facade that abusers like to create and to put out there that um, he may be well liked, well respected, may even be a leader in the church, a ministry, heavily involved in ministry in some capacity. But at home, it's a very different story. And conversely, the wife may appear emotional or angry, maybe inarticulate, has a hard time even describing what's going on. I maybe as a little illustration, I don't know if these are still around or not, but years ago, they were kind of popular. These, I guess they were paintings or drawings or something, but they would, all these colored dots that, if you're looking at it from a distance, it just looks like a mess of color. But as you would begin to focus on it, you could start to see images within these dots that would start to take shape. And it was one of those things, if you stared at it long enough, you could see it, but it took some time to really understand what the image was. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. It was very evident that it was there. And I think domestic violence can be the same way, that it can be counterintuitive, it can be difficult to see, but then once you begin to see it and you begin to understand it, it's hard to unsee it in a relationship.
Yeah.
Yes, that is so true. Yeah, once you see it, it's like, oh, you can't unsee it. That is
Hmm.
well said. How can you come alongside a pastor to help him understand domestic abuse? How do you do that in your role as a church partner liaison?
I think one of the things that I do, As Dan was describing that picture, it reminded me of an illustration that Chris Moles uses of constellations. You can
Mhm.
point out where the constellations are, but if you're just pointing at one star, you don't really see the pattern. So to come alongside pastors and help them recognize the patterns. Yes, he's willing to admit that this happened, but how much is being left out? How much does he own, or how much does he minimize? How many times is
Mhm.
he saying, yes, that happened, but this is why? And that in explaining that, it's a defense, it's a justification, it's a lack or an avoidance of being accountable for his behavior. And to help pastors recognize that going on, um, is probably one of the bigger things. That, and also helping them to recognize that it's not a quick answer, that they will need to take some time to understand not only what he's saying, but also to hear what she's saying, believe what she's saying, and to um, counsel with her before making a move, because you could put her in great risk. So to help them understand that for the longest, if she's finally speaking up, she has reached the limit. And what they have heard about their situation up to this point has most likely been uh, documented and disseminated by the abuser. And so the stage was set for him. And we have to be able to recognize the stage and the players and how it's shaking out. And there are patterns to that.
Yeah, I think that's well said,
Wow.
Andre, and I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add to that, frankly, because you explained very well what we do. But I think along with the abuser dynamics and the patterns that would be exhibited by an abuser, they're as unique as a fingerprint, and yet there are still patterns that emerge. And similarly with victims, to understand their behavior and their responses. Sometimes churches are inclined to um, hold the victims accountable and not hold the abuser accountable for behaviors. And so I think understanding trauma and some of those things that are a part of all of this as well is equally important.
Mhm. Very true. If you could give any advice to women watching on how to appeal to her pastor about an abusive marriage that she's in, what would you say to her?
Go ahead, Andre.
Okay. um, you know, Dan spoke of how a pastor's schedule runs sometimes. Um, I think sometimes it is very important to, uh, we have to be succinct sometimes when we're speaking. I have to practice it, and it's harder when I'm emotional about something. So to if a woman is about to approach her pastor, a male pastor, maybe start by finding an advocate, either through Call to Peace Ministries, or maybe uh, finding one or seeking one out within the congregation, that would also help be a mouthpiece to help form the word so it doesn't come off as sporadic, but to be succinct in um, recognizing the behaviors and the the offenses that have been portrayed on her, and to be specific about those rather than trying to label things. Um, we
Mhm.
pastors are not always, we're masters of general things. And so to be calling in specific names and diagnoses and things of that nature really just puts us in a position where we know we're out of our league. But there is still something we can do if we're understanding these behaviors are not right. These are sinful behaviors. Everything you're listing here is out of,
Mm.
is offensive to me. I would not take it right as a pastor. So to hear what's going on, to be able to recognize the patterns as you're speaking it, will be very helpful in getting a pastor's attention, um, or helping him to know how to refer or to engage.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a couple of really key points there in terms of, I think it's really, really helpful to have an advocate that can walk
Mm.
with you through that and be there to kind of affirm you and support you in that conversation. Um, I think it, every church, every situation is kind of unique, and every pastor is probably a little bit different in terms of their own experience in handling these kinds of situations as well. And so I don't know if even before you approached him specifically with um, your needs and concerns, if there would even be an appropriate way to just find out what he currently even believes about domestic abuse in just a generic
Yeah.
sense. Don't lay everything at his feet initially, but just find out, what are the things that he believes to be true about abuse and domestic violence. And I think if you can learn that, you can kind of determine what next steps would be appropriate, and go from there.
I think what Dan just shared right there is huge, because you have to be, as a woman, you need to make sure that you're in a safe place to to uh, to share that information, and that you're not dealing with someone with a knee-jerk reaction that will immediately reveal what you just revealed to them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times for women too, you've been betrayed so much in your marriage. So going to a pastor that's probably not understanding the dynamics of domestic abuse could be actually become more traumatic than what it ends up, especially if they're like, they don't believe you, or and they side with the abuser and tell him things are going on, or tell the abuser that he thinks you're being, I don't know, whatever they could say, oh, she's not being submissive and things like that, and teams up against you. So I think definitely what you said about bringing an advocate along with you, and finding out what is his viewpoint on domestic violence. Does he believe that exists, or is he like, no, I always believe that's a submission problem, which hopefully they won't say. We know right then and there that's a code word that this is probably not going to be a good situation to confront, or a good
Right.
person to help us.
Yeah.
um, so
A good clue would be whether or not you've heard anything against that type of oppression and domestic violence in any sermons, whether you see anything posted in your church, uh, whether there's a ministry that speaks to that specifically. Uh, those will be great indications on on how slowly you should proceed in introducing your problem.
very good point. Yes. I think if their sermons are very submissive heavy, I'm not debating complementarians and stuff here, then that's probably also a very good indicator too. If you hear a lot of sermons that are very heavy on the men's role, but never focusing, I mean, on the woman's role, but never focusing on what the men's role is in serving and loving as Christ loved his church, that's also an indicator too. You can kind of get the vibe of what's going on in your church. And, you can't change people's hearts ultimately. You cannot change your pastor's heart, but maybe he is open, especially if you see that they do have a very high and holy view of marriage in protecting women and children. Um, I reached out to my church and they did not have a domestic abuse ministry or any understanding of that, but they had a heart for the abused and the oppressed, and had a lot of ministries for that. So I would think also too, looking around and seeing what their heart is towards the abused and the oppressed and how they view that, can also be a healthy indicator.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to add? I don't know that Jim Upchurch is actually going to join us today. I have not seen him come on yet. Who knows? We may be surprised.
I would add, just in our last comment, what came to thought was, pay attention to how your pastors or the elders or the deacons interact with their wives. That's a great indication as to how, um, some of their thoughts on that. If they are modeling what you would like to see or what you would like to be experiencing at home would be another good indication there. The other side, as far as for the pastors, um, one of the things that I was trained in as I was coming up, in a general way, was that if you're coming up against something new and you're not proficient in it, then you want to look to refer. And that means to refer the person out for help and also make references for yourselves to become more aware and more knowledgeable about what you're dealing with so that you can be a master of just one more thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I would just add, we have some training opportunities. I've said this before, but you'll never regret the time that you spend learning about this issue and learning how to respond if in an effective way that really helps rather than hurts. And so, take advantage of opportunities like the Protect the Flock training that's coming up, and yeah, I think you and your ministry will benefit greatly in doing that.
Yes. Every ministry benefits from having understanding of domestic abuse because you run into it in everywhere. Church leaders or pastors, or if you have your own ministry, definitely become informed. You will constantly be running into situations of domestic abuse, and being prepared to handle them is always wise. To be shepherd people that God has put underneath you, or I guess as they put in your care.
Mhm.
Well, thank you both for joining us today. I am very grateful for each of y'all, and for Jim, who's not here, and for all the work that you do with Call to Peace Ministries and advocating for women and helping our churches be able to be prepared to help these women as well, and be the hands and feet of Jesus to them. So thank you so much for your
Thank you,
brave
Laura.
and your courageous faith and standing up for the abused and the oppressed. We are grateful for y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I hope everybody has a good day. If you have any questions, you're welcome to leave them in the comments. I'm not sure if we can answer them. If they're questions too, you can also email them as well. And I will leave that email address in the link to the top of this post live today, so you can contact them if you have any more additional questions. I do not believe any of them are on Facebook. So if you leave questions in the comments, they may not be able to answer them, but I can try my best to answer them. And if not, we can always direct you to them. So please reach out if you have any questions at all, or if you're a pastor and would like more information. And also, we have a Protect the Flock coming up October 26th. You can sign up for that. There was a post that went up over this weekend that had a link to that. I can also link that here to this video as well. And there'll be a training for pastors and church leaders on how to be able to properly respond to domestic abuse within your church.
Thank you.
Thank you. Y'all have a good day.
You
Bye,
too.
everybody.
Yeah. Bye-bye.